Vorarlberg is the westernmost and the second smallest state of Austria. Its position within the country is quite unique because the local dialect is a lot closer to that of Switzerland and the southwest of Germany than that of the rest of Austria. This was one reason, among many, why a referendum was held there in 1919 in which the overwhelming majority of Vorarlbergers decided to become a part of Switzerland. Why did this referendum happen? Who supported it, and most importantly, why weren't they allowed in? After 4 long and brutal years of war, and with the hopes of victory dwindling more day after day, the population of Austria wanted to finally see peace. Towards the end of summer 1918, more than 230,000 soldiers had deserted. The supply situation was abysmal in many parts of the empire. Demonstrations, even some revolts, popped up virtually everywhere, and many of the representatives of the Imperial Council began to voice their calls for independence. The young Kaiser Karl I tried to salvage the situation by releasing the Völker Manifest, in which he promised to reform the empire into a federation with widespread autonomies for the various nationalities. But it was simply too little, too late. Faced with this almost hopeless situation, the Kaiser broke his military alliance with Germany and sued for peace on the 28th of October. On the same day, Czechoslovakia proclaimed its independence in Prague, and 1 day later the state of Slovenes, Croats and Serbs did the same. In Vienna, the German-speaking members of the House of Deputies were preparing the creation of the Republic of German Austria. Budapest herself dissolved the union between this completely fragmented Austria and Hungary on the 31st of October. After a very tumultuous 2 weeks, the armistice of Villa Giusti was signed on the 3rd of November, which finally ended the war between Austria and the Allies. Now, if you too would like to secede from your country and become a part of another, you can finally do so, at least online, with the help of today's sponsor Atlas VPN. Atlas offers you the best and most affordable VPN deal on the market for just $1.70 per month, with a 30-day money-back guarantee and an extra 6 months for free if you use the link in the description. The app is extremely intuitive and easy to use, and it allows you to connect to 45 different countries, even fictional ones, within a matter of seconds. Amazing. As soon as you've established a connection, you can keep your Google searches in private. With a single subscription, you can protect an unlimited amount of devices, be it computers, mobile phones, or even Android TVs. On top of that, Atlas also has other neat features that block ads, malicious links, or trackers, and they even notify you when someone is trying to steal your data. But that's not all. If you like traveling, you could potentially save some money on sites like Booking.com or Kiwi.com, which determine your prices based on your current location. Atlas can also help you access content that isn't normally available in your country, be it on Netflix, Steam, or YouTube. Once again, Atlas VPN is running a massive Christmas discount right now where you can get a 3-year subscription for just $1.70 per month, with an extra 6 months for free and a 30-day money-back guarantee. So have a private Christmas and a safe new year with Atlas VPN, and click the link in the description below. Vorarlberg had suffered greatly during the war, as it was an industrial region which was heavily reliant on food supplies from other parts of the Austrian Empire, especially from Galicia. A culprit had to be found, and it didn't take the members of the Christian Social Party, as well as the German Liberal Party, to find one, or rather, two. The central government in Vienna, and of course, the favourite scapegoat of any conspiracy theory, the Jews. The Catholic newspaper Vorarlberger Volksblatt wrote after the revolution in Vienna, "Hands off our beautiful country, damned Jew." Like elsewhere in Europe in the 19th century, it became sort of fashionable to blame all aspects of modern life, be it socialism, urbanization, the stock market, or industrialization, on the minority Jewish population, especially in conservative environments. Previously, the dislike towards Jews mostly had a religious background, but in the preceding decades it became a lot more political and ideological, with people like Karl Lueger, the mayor of Vienna from 1897 to 1910, who purposefully used their anti-Semitism to further their political careers. Behind this background, behind all the hunger, the despair, the anti-Semitism, and the desire to break free from the old ways of the Habsburg monarchy, a movement to join the Swiss neighbour appeared. This movement was led by a teacher from the town of Lustenau called Ferdinand Riedmann. He had already travelled to Switzerland in 1912, and he immediately became a big fan of this country. In the Lustenauer Kronensaal, the first big meeting of the secession movement was organised on the 22nd of November 1918. There, Riedmann argued that Vorarlberg would be too small to become an independent country, and that both Austria and Germany would soon completely be ruled by a Jewish government. He stated that, in quotes, "Vienna does not know the Vorarlbergers and we want nothing to do with the Viennese Jews," followed by, "We do not want to forfeit our freedom and our right to self-determination by joining a state in which even today the aristocracy rules alongside the Jews. No to Vienna, no to Berlin." I swear, reading this just destroyed half of my brain cells. In January of 1919, the assembly began to collect signatures all over Vorarlberg for their cause, and by March of the same year, about 70% of the population signed a petition in favour of joining Switzerland. This petition was brought before the Vorarlberg State Assembly, who could no longer ignore the issue. But before we move on, why did so many people want to secede from Austria all of a sudden? In the preceding decades, nothing had pointed to such a big movement, and the masses enthusiastically cheered for Kaiser Franz Josef I when he visited Bregenz in 1909. But 4 years of industrial warfare do take their toll. The Joint Switzerland movement was supported mostly by farms who had lost one or more of their sons, by people who had lost all their savings to war bonds, by small enterprises who had lost their export market due to Austria's collapse, and by the thousands of people who experienced the lack of food on a daily basis. The many food deliveries from Switzerland in exchange for hay and wood massively improved the general public's opinion of that small country. On top of that, it should be noted that the fear of a socialist takeover was very present at that time. The Spartakist uprising in Germany, the revolutionary sentiment in neighbouring Bavaria, and the growing influence of the Social Democrats in Vienna evoked almost nightmarish imaginations for the rather conservative populace. So in contrast with all of this going on, Switzerland seemed like a perfect and peaceful utopia. Of course, many people also voiced their opposition to this idea, especially intellectuals, doctors, lawyers, and large factory owners who would much rather have joined up with Germany. Nevertheless, the advocates for a Swiss Vorarlberg didn't slow down their campaign. They constantly spread fear against the Jews and the local government in Vienna. On top of that, they also argued that Vorarlberg was culturally a lot more connected to Switzerland, with a similar dialect, a similar love for democracy, and with similar traditions. So, while the reasons for seceding from Austria were generally of a material kind, they were embedded with an ideological explanation to put the blame for all the current problems on a fringe minority. A rallying strategy that would be perfected just 15 years later. At the same time, another movement began to emerge, that of joining the northern neighbour, Germany. The supporters of this idea argued that the ties with Germany, especially with the southwestern state of Württemberg, were much closer and that they could profit a lot more from an economic perspective. They warned that joining Switzerland could financially ruin Vorarlberg, and they founded the Vorarlberger Tagblatt, a newspaper essentially dedicated to promoting the idea of a Greater Germany. On the 19th of January, an article they wrote stated, "So we have a mixture of peoples in Switzerland, as we did not have it much worse in the old Austria. We have finally got rid of the Czechs, the Poles, the Little Russians, the Italians, the Polish Jews, who all had to live side by side in this collapsed Austria. And now we are to return to a state in which the Germans are in the majority, but in which the French have much more to say than their number and importance correspond to." And a bit later down the line, "For us Vorarlbergers who think and feel like a people, the thought of being subject to an almost purely French government is most unpleasant. In this respect, we think differently from the Swiss. For us Vorarlbergers, ethnicity is paramount. A Vorarlberger abroad who is asked what he is will always answer, 'I am a German.'" So, as you can see, the Join Germany movement was very enthusiastically advocating for an all-German state, which in their eyes is the only logical solution. They very much expected that the fragmented and ruinous Republic of German Austria would unite with Germany in the next few years anyway, so their only goal was to prevent Vorarlberg from joining Switzerland. They received financial support from the German government, even after the Allies very clearly prohibited Austria from joining Germany, even if it wished so. The German government's main goal then was to keep Austria alive and to not weaken it any further, which meant preventing the secession of Vorarlberg with all possible means. German diplomats in Bern were asked with discrediting the Joint Switzerland movement and with threatening the parliament that this step would inevitably lead to a severe worsening of German-Swiss relations. The Austrian government also didn't want this to happen. obviously, and the Social Democratic Chancellor Karl Renner pressured the government in Vorarlberg to stop their support, and they also travelled to Bern to lobby against the secession. The Swiss government itself was not too fond of an eastward expansion either, because although Switzerland didn't participate in the war, those 4 years still had consequences. The country had been heavily divided between the French-speaking cantons, who overwhelmingly supported France, and the German-speaking cantons, who supported the German Empire. On top of that, food became scarce and prices went up, while the war industry and the agrarian sector were recording unusually high profits. This unhappiness culminated into a 3-day-long general strike in November of 1918, which only calmed down after the military presence in cities was increased drastically. With such a fragile political situation, the annexation of impoverished, German-speaking and Catholic Vorarlberg could very well disrupt the balance even further. On top of that, Italy made it clear that they would demand the Italian-speaking canton of Ticino as compensation should Switzerland expand eastward. It is not surprising then that the Swiss Federal Council was largely opposed to the Anschluss of Vorarlberg, with one exception. The Foreign Minister Felix Calonder openly voiced his support, and on the 3rd of May, he promised that in case of a positive referendum, negotiations would be opened up. And just 8 days later, the referendum was held and approved by a whopping 81% of the voters. But both Switzerland and the government in Vienna decided that it's probably best to wait for the end of the peace treaty talks in Paris. The Vorarlberger state governor, Otto Ender, was part of the Austrian delegation there, but was never given the chance to present the wish to join Switzerland. And by June of 1919 it became quite clear that the Entente powers wished to preserve Austria's western borders. France especially was against this idea, and Italy still insisted on getting southern Switzerland as compensation. In the end, all the victorious countries at Saint-Germain were either indifferent or strictly against the Vorarlberg Anschluss. And in December of 1919, Georges Clemenceau assured Otto Renner that France would not support any independence movement from Vorarlberg, Tyrol, Salzburg, or any other part of Austria. The newly founded League of Nations promised that Vorarlberg would receive the right of self-determination in case of a complete collapse of the Austrian state, which of course never happened. After it became clear that there was no chance for Vorarlberg ever joining Switzerland, and after the chaotic years of 1918-1919 came to an end, most of the Join Switzerland movement support began to die down and fade into obscurity. As long as the Austrian Republic remained at least somewhat of a functioning state, the need to become a part of Switzerland was essentially irrelevant. The other big Anschluss movement, that of joining Germany, would however remain very strong for years to come. Although Austria was prohibited from becoming a part of Germany in the Treaty of Saint-Germain, the desire was still there, as many Austrians could never identify themselves with their new republic. Many sought after the good old days of empire, and desired to finally bring about Greater Germany. However, after the Anschluss of 1938 and its catastrophic consequences, the desire died down for good, and the former brother countries became each other's worst enemies, after the Austrians found out that the Germans liked to put sauce on their schnitzels, which is regarded as the worst and most heinous crime you could possibly commit. Alright then, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I would like to especially thank A Cup of Tea and James. You are phenomenal. If you want, please consider joining these lovely people and supporting me on Ko-Fi. Goodbye, and see you next time.